Hello, everyone. Welcome to IABC Asia Pacific's webinar on building your own winning measurement program, irrespective of budget. I'm Saima Sharif. I serve on IABC APAC board as Director of Professional Development. Hi, can I have the panelist on mute, please? Thank you. I'm Saima Sharif. I serve on IABC APAC board as Director of Professional Development. I'm based in India and I run Crimson, an internal communication agency. We are honored to have with us today Richard Bagnall, Chairman of AMAC, the International Association for Measurement and Evaluation of Communications. Richard has advised global clients on the best ways to measure the effectiveness of PR and how to prove its value for over 22 years. Prior to his career in PR measurement and insight, Richard worked in public relations for medical charity, the Royal College of General Practitioners, and also for Saatchi & Saatchi's PR business, the Roland Company. Richard has been a board director of AMAC for over 10 years. Along with Richard, we also have with us Khali Sakas, chairman of APAC chapter, who's based out of Australia, and Asim Sood, vice chair of AMAC APAC chapter, who is from India. Richard is from UK, by the way, and currently both Richard and Khali are in China for a particular event. So they have told us that seemingly there could be some internet connectivity issues in China. Just in case this session gets disconnected, please bear with us and we will get right back to you. In this webinar, Richard will guide you to align your measurement program with global best practice and how to prove the value of your work. He will also be sharing case study of global award-winning work. This webinar is a part of IABC Asia Pacific support to the Say No to AVEs campaign being run by AMAC. Just a couple of points before I hand this over to Richard. You can ask your questions using Q&A anytime during the webinar. Richard will answer these at the end of the presentation. Also, we are recording this webinar and we'll mail you a link after the presentation. Thank you. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Saima, for the introduction. And most importantly, thank you everybody for logging in and joining us on this call. The honor is all mine. I'm really thrilled and delighted to be in this critical region and be able to support and help by presenting today. So thank you very much for including me and inviting me to speak. I think it's a critical time in the world of evaluation and the world of PR. We face many opportunities, but we also face many threats. And if we can't get our approach to measurement right, I think that we've got some real challenges. So I'm going to talk today about why we have challenges, where these challenges have come from. I'm going to give a case study that's going to show us what can go wrong if we don't change our measurement and think differently about how we should do it. I'm going to give you some practical steps on what you can take away from you after today's webinar and use in the office later on to help your own measurement program, which will work irrespective of your budgets. And I'm also going to show you and share with you a case study of how you can do award-winning work. So that's going to be today's agenda. And then obviously, as Saima said, I'll be very pleased to answer questions. As Saima also said, I've run PR measurement companies for 22 years, but prior to that, I worked in PR and communications myself, in-house and at agencies. And you know, many of you on the call today will remember how the world of PR used to be and how much change. Sorry, that just getting my slide to go forward. All right, how much everything has changed. So first of all, the world of media. You know, the days when I started off in PR, I was a junior in a PR agency, and my job was to receive the press clips, which came as originals cut out of newspapers, and I used to shake them out of an envelope, and they'd come out like confetti. The world of media was very stable. There were just printed publications. There was no online, no digital. And one of the expressions I've always enjoyed was people who say, wasn't it nice when all of the world's news fitted exactly into the pages of a single newspaper? Of course, those days are long gone. We know that the media faces massive challenges, and the business model of print is broken all around the world. And so what the media has done is it's tried to move towards embracing digital, thinking that here would be the answer to their monetization issues. What we're seeing, though, is that the monetization that the media thought would happen in digital just is not materializing at a rate that's keeping publications in business. The Harvard Business Review recently did some research and stated that in its view, 50% of US print publications will cease to publish in the next 3 years. They're all going online, but what they're finding is that there's enormous competition for eyeballs and attention. There's more content than ever before. There's more publishers than ever before. Of course, consumers can be publishers as well. The one thing that isn't scaling is our time and therefore our attention. Some research amongst the UK population showed that only 4 in 10 people now read beyond a headline or a picture. So quite what that says for the content that we work so hard to generate, is open to question. And we can see mainstream media brands. We've got here a clip from the BBC are resorting to techniques to try and tempt us and tease us into looking at their content. And it's creating a real issue. You may have heard of the expression content shock. There's just too much content for the amount of time that we have. And of course, as PR people, we're contributing, as our industry has changed as well, to that content shock. The old days of PR, it used to be about, people say, well, it's predominantly about media relations. Those days are long gone. Now the skills that we want people, if we're going to be recruiting for our agency, people have got to be able to work right across the peso model, across paid, earned, shared, and owned. They need skills in all of these. They need to understand how to promote content with advertising, how to write great content for own media, and of course, how to engage with communities through social channels as well. So PR has changed, the media has changed, but what hasn't changed enough is how so many people think about measurement. So my challenge today is that we have to, if we're going to prove our value, think differently about the way that we measure, because the early days of measurement are still dominant in huge parts of the world and huge parts of the industry, where what most measurement that was done was purely what we call content analysis. So it was looking at content and coding that. And then there were different metrics that could be called out of the content. And one of the most used, but also the most flawed, is this concept of AVE. And Seema mentioned it, that Almec is running a campaign at the moment. AVE, of course, stands for Advertising Value Equivalent. I'm not going to go into it in detail, but what I would like to say is that research shows that since measurement and since PR began, no academic research has ever been done anywhere in the world that shows that AVE has any kind of validity as a metric. There's not one piece of research that says this is a good metric to use. In 2010, many global trade associations came together with the Barcelona Principles, which were 7 broad statements on how best to measure communications. And principle number 5 is probably the most famous, which is that AVEs are not a valid metric. And yet their use around the world is in steep decline, which is great, but still a significant proportion, a minority, but still a significant proportion, try to measure with this flawed metric. There are 22 reasons at least why this is a flawed metric. And if you'd like to read the white paper on it, then you'll find it linked at the bottom of this page. It's at a URL shortened link, so bit.ly/say no to AVEs. And that white paper's there so that if you're under pressure from bosses or colleagues or clients to produce an AVE, and you don't want to, it gives you that third-party endorsement to be able to say to them, this is why we're not going to provide this invalid metric anymore, and this is how we're going to think about measuring. This is how we're going to think about measuring for the future. So please do go and take a look at that URL. But a lot of people say to me, you know, measurement is now easier and better than it's ever been before, because I have all of these people selling me software and selling me solutions and selling me tools for measuring my communications. And in fact, I've got these amazing dashboards and charts and portals, and they're real time. They look fantastic. We've got these command centers that we hear about at different organizations. But my challenge to you, and the challenge with this type of measurement, is that we have to distinguish between counting stuff for the sake of counting and measuring the stuff that actually matters. It's very easy to count a whole load of numbers, but just because you can count it doesn't mean that it matters. And I'm now going to show us, I'm going to go into that and explain it in a little bit more detail. First of all, I want us to think about just absolute numbers, just presenting measurement in terms of absolute numbers. If we think back to the old world of the media, when it was all focused on print, the number of print publications stayed very stable and static year after year. It didn't change significantly on an annual basis. The number of readers per publication didn't change massively on an annual basis. So if you can imagine the situation where you're measuring an annual campaign, and you measure the same campaign, you measure it last year and you measure it this year. In that old world of the media, if you compared things like, well, how many articles did we get? How many impressions did we get? And you got more this year than last year, it would have been fair enough to say, that looks like we've done better. That's a perfectly reasonable assumption. The issue is today, that stable universe has gone. The amount of channels that you can publish on has exploded exponentially and continues to grow exponentially. The amount of the audience that have access to this content is exploding exponentially. This chart that we're seeing is from probably the most authoritative research into internet users by a lady called Mary Meeker, who every April, so it'll be coming out soon again this year's, does this huge research project into the state of the internet and all kinds of stuff. It's freely available for download, so I'd recommend you go and do a Google search for it and find it and download it. But what you can see here is the percentage of the global population on social networks, how it's grown and how it's going to continue to grow. And of course, particularly in this critically important region of the world, this number is going to continue to expand at a massively rapid rate for a number of years still to come. So the concept of absolute numbers today, if we got 20 more articles and we get 50,000 more impressions, it's very difficult to say whether that has any kind of meaning when this universe, just like our own universe, is continually expanding. So the concept of absolute numbers on their own is losing its relevance. But let's look at some of the social and digital platforms and try and understand how people often try and suggest some metrics that we might want to focus on. So here is a screen grab of the BBC Breaking News Twitter handle. And if what I'm asking you all to think about is, imagine that you got for your client a really positive piece on this Twitter feed. I think we'd all be delighted. The question then would be, well, how are we going to present this good news to our colleagues and our boss? And I think we might all focus on that number at the top there, which is followers. And you can see that when I took the screen grab, there were 21.2 million followers. So we might well decide that that is the metric that we're going to report. But then some people would say, well, actually, that got retweeted by some of those followers and more people saw it, and they'd apply a multiplier and they'd increase that number. Other people would say, well, of course, not everybody in that 21.2 million is online all of the time and sees every single tweet. So a question for us all to think about: what number would you use to report this? Would you use the 21.2? Would you factor it up? Would you factor it down? Have a think about that, and then think about this, that of course not all of those followers are actually real. I think we all know, Twitter particularly, but a lot of these social networks are subject to all kinds of sort of frauds and suspect behavior. There's a tool called Status People, which allows you to look into this kind of information. And when you look at the BBC Breaking News' followers, you'll see at the bottom of the screen now, it estimates that 6% of them are fake, i.e. they're just not real Twitter accounts. 70% are inactive, or what sometimes people call lurkers, and only 24% are real and what we also might call good. Now, the good, okay, fair enough, that's a quarter of the 21 million, so that's about 5 million. The inactive, well, lurkers, sometimes people like to be on Twitter, but they don't actually participate, they use it for research. So some of those inactive people are relevant, but of course a whole load of them are people who have been on Twitter and have left it because of all the challenges that the platform faces. They've got disenchanted with it, so they've left it. So what, again, my challenge to you all is, what number do we take? Do we take the 25%, a quarter of 21 million, and report that number? Do we add a few? What I'm hoping you can see that I'm doing here is explaining that the actual answer is nobody knows. The closest way that you can see how many people have seen a tweet, any of you that are on Twitter, if you go to analytics.twitter.com, it will show you all of your own tweets, and it will show you how many impressions each of your tweets had. But note that that is only impressions. It's how many times Twitter has displayed your tweet. It doesn't even mean that anybody has seen it still. But what you'll find is that the average is about 3 or 4% of your followers. But your very best tweets, if you say something really interesting and relevant, it may go to about 10%. But again, we don't know what the BBC Breaking News' numbers are. We don't have access to their analytics, and it depends from between 3 and 10. So my point is that you can't use these impression numbers as anything more than basically some kind of index that goes up and down. It certainly isn't how many people have seen the content, and it certainly doesn't tell us what they do with it. When we couple that information with things like this, which is that Google recently did some research and announced that 61% of traffic on the internet is not human. So it's software, it's bots. Facebook said that, sorry, not Facebook, YouTube said that 57% of the videos that they count as viewed are rendered in a way and on a device that is actually unviewable. Facebook, as you know, was counting a video view as 3 seconds without sound. I can buy followers, likes, shares, retweets, all of these type of things for just a few dollars from software farms that will just sell you this stuff. And that's a very real problem for the rise of fake influencers. As we do more influencer marketing, where we're trying to reach influencers, we're seeing this growth in basically fake influencers, people who have bought followings so that brands will then pay them to promote their stuff, and it's causing a real problem. Procter & Gamble has got so concerned, and actually Unilever as well, by all of this, that both of their global marketing directors have issued rallying calls to the industry, saying that if the industry doesn't sort its metrics out and start giving it meaningful measurement, they're going to stop spending money in digital channels altogether. And in fact, they have cut back their digital spending significantly, and they've seen no effect. The Procter & Gamble research estimates that 10% of what we would call mainstream media publications online are subject to ad fraud. What that means is that there are software programs replicating humans, hitting sites to drive up the advertising, but nobody's actually seeing that content. So these output metrics, these metrics that we've relied on in the past, volumes, impressions, even things like messaging. When we think about messaging, you know, the old world of PR and comms that I started was very much a one-way, top-down communication model. The brand wanted to communicate its message to its audience. We all know now that that is not the right approach. We live in an era of permission-based marketing where it's about engaging in a conversation. So even measuring messages has to be questioned. None of us go into a conversation with a friend to deliver messages. We go to engage with our friend. So let me give you a quick case study on what can go wrong if we don't change our thinking. And this is a Pepsi Refresh challenge, Pepsi Refresh project, which was a few years ago now, but it really stands the test of time of the points that I'm making. So this was, cast your mind back to 2010. It was the early exciting years of social, Twitter, Facebook, were all going massive, huge growth at the time. Everyone was piling in. And brands were working out how to engage successfully with these platforms. And what Pepsi did, I think, was a really nice idea. What they said was, we're going to stop spending so much money on advertising, and we're going to divert some of our budget, and we're going to spend it instead on engaging with our social media communities. So what they did for the first time in 25 years, they diverted $21 million from advertising in the Super Bowl halftime. It's the most prestigious advertising space that you can have if you're an American brand. And they took, instead of doing that advert, they took that money and they put it into this project. And the project was a great piece of corporate social responsibility work. What they said was, we're going to ask our communities to recommend to us worthy causes that need our financial support. So it engaged with the community that they'd grown on Facebook and Twitter and everything, asked them to recommend things. So people were recommending things like, my school needs a new school roof. The local hospital needs some new machine. And then people would vote on it, and depending on the amount of votes, meant that Pepsi would then fund the project. And the community got stuck in. And when they measured the success of this project, they found that they got these numbers. And I think all of us, if we look at these numbers, would agree these are some of the biggest numbers you've probably ever seen in any kind of measurement report. So 2.9 billion impressions, 3.5 million likes, increase being shown there as a percentage, loads of tweets, loads of new followers, and even unique views and even votes. So it looked like this was a huge success. The problem was that when the metrics that mattered to the business came back, Pepsi was being crushed. So what had happened in this period when they'd stopped doing the advertising, they'd focused on social, was the brand had slipped from challenging Coke as a very close number 2 to number 3 behind even Diet Coke, which is, if you're the premium, sugared version of the brand is a disastrous place to be. So it moved from the number 2 to the number 3 brand. It's had a 5% decline in sales, at 8 times faster than had ever happened before. And that 5% decline in sales equated to a loss of revenue of $500 million. Pepsi had to take, obviously, immediate remedial action. So the first thing they did was they spent $600 million on above-the-line advertising to try to rescue the situation. They had to go on a cost-cutting exercise, and 8,700 people lost their jobs. And included in that was the marketing director who had backed this campaign, whose name was Massimo Demori. Now, I don't want that to happen to us in the PR community. I want us to think about our measurement and understand that these type of metrics on their own might look good, But on their own, unless we can link to the organization that we represent's objectives and what it's trying to achieve, we might be just completely focused on the wrong things. We have to change the way that we think about our measurement. We shouldn't just count stuff that's easy to count, the vanity metrics. We need to start measuring the stuff that matters. So how do we do that? Well, the good news is that the more things have changed, the more they've stayed the same. So if you boil down what it's trying to do, we're trying to get our organization's message, its position, its state of mind, its state of view. We're trying to communicate that to the right communities, the right audiences. And we're doing that for a reason, to achieve an objective. This slide, incidentally, is a slide that 22 years ago I used at Metrica, my first measurement company, to train my new members of staff on a very basic, what is PR? And it's stood the test of time. We are trying to get our organization's messages to the right people at the right time and in the right place, because, and the critical bit here is to achieve an objective. Now, the way that we measure and the terminology that we use as measurement people tends to focus on these three things: outputs, outtakes, and outcomes. So because some people get confused, I wanted just to explain to everybody nice and simply what they are. Outputs is all of the stuff that comes back to us as a result of our work. So in those early days when I was that PR account exec at the agency shaking out the envelopes, it was those newspaper clips. Today, it includes the digital content. It includes any content that comes back in whatever form that it might be as a result of our work. And that's where content analysis happens, which is, as I've said at the beginning, has been one of the mainstays of PR measurement over the years. But outtakes is what our audience, now having read, seen, heard, listened to this content, what do they now think? So what do they think, having been exposed to our content? And then the outcomes, the outcomes is what do they now do, having thought about the content that they've read. So outputs is the content itself, outtakes is what people now think, outcomes is what they now do. And what we have to do is move our measurement thinking from a focus only on outputs to start to include outtakes and outcomes as well, because outtakes and outcomes are where the business cares. And what Pepsi did wrong with those metrics that I showed you, all of those metrics were focused basically on the outputs. They were counting the stuff that's easy to count, and they'd lost sight of the stuff that mattered to the money, the stuff that matters to the company, the stuff that makes the money. Our bosses, the CFOs, the CEOs, they care about the money, the profit margins, the revenue, and we have to show how our work supports that. And my challenge to you, if you think about the measurement programs you're running at the moment, is where do they sit going from left to right on this page? I believe that most of you will find that your measurement sits on the left in the outputs category. And if that is where it is, then you are exposed to this challenge of measuring in a way that is meaningless to the organization in PR's own special language and terms. And we have to start thinking, how do we link our work to outtakes and outcomes? I'm not advocating that we stop measuring outputs, but instead that we think of outputs as the digital breadcrumbs, the levers that we can control that then help us link through to outtakes and outcomes, because that is where the business cares, the organization cares. So how should we think about a campaign? Well, again, the more things have changed, the more they've stayed the same. So we start in this triangle here, we start from the top. So we start with organizational goals and objectives. We understand what it is that our organization wants us to do. We then link our communications goals and objectives to that. Only once we've understood how those things link together can we understand and work on our strategy. And only when we understand our common strategy can we then start to think about, well, what tactics are we going to employ? And only once we've got to that point can we possibly know what the right way to monitor, measure, prove our value is. We have to follow it in that order. And the number one mistake I see all around the world is that people start at the bottom. So they say, well, we're running a digital campaign. I need digital monitoring and digital analytics. And so they sign up to any one of the hundreds of software as a service companies that are providing these real-time, amazing looking dashboards that are counting stuff. And then they suddenly realize, but hold on, this isn't answering the questions that my bosses are asking me about how I'm adding value to the organization. And so please start at the top of this chart, sit with your bosses, your peers in your organization, understand, debate with them in advance of campaigns what success looks like. How can communications realistically support the organizational goals and objectives? And agree with them what the realistic targets are, and agree with them what the right metrics for you to focus and how you're going to get that data. A lot of that data, incidentally, will exist already within your organization. It just may be that other departments have it. So let me now tell you about some free resource that the Trade Association Almec has put together for everyone's benefit on how to think about this. So Almec has a framework, which is basically a process that any organization can follow. As I say, it's free to use. It's a step-by-step process and advice to help you think through this on any campaign that you might be working on. You'll find it at this URL, so almec.org.com/Almec Framework. It's been translated into over 20 languages. And if you were to choose your language, it will appear obviously in that language of your choice. It's got a whole variety of support material and advice from experts from all around the world on your measurement challenges. If you go into the framework itself, it looks like this. As I mentioned, it's a step-by-step process to guide you through. What you'll see in the top left corner is that you can log in and you can register. So it's free to use. Everybody can have an account, and you can, if you're an in-house practitioner, you can have your campaigns in here. If you're an agency, you can have your different clients and their different campaigns all saved and all recorded in here for you, so that you can refer back to it frequently. And what you see then is it's a 7-step process. Quite obviously, they're numbered and they're color-coded, and it's interactive. Because of the risk of internet connectivity, I'm not going to give you a live demo, but I've got some screen grabs. But you can go and have a play with this framework yourselves at that URL, almec.org.com/Almec Framework. So if we were to click on number 1, where it says start here, the box opens up. And you remember from the triangle that I showed you just a few moments ago, we start with our organizational objectives. What is it that we're trying to achieve? Our recommendation is that you sit down at the planning stage with your peer group within your organization, and you make sure everything's aligned. So what is it that the organization wants us to achieve from this campaign? How are we going to align in the bottom part of that red box? How are we going to align our communications objectives with those organizational ones? And what you'll see is that each box has a little eye beside it. And if you click that eye, then this bigger white box pops up with a bit more information. And again, on that further information box, it says for even more information, click here. And if you click that, it takes you through to the relevant part of what we call the taxonomy. The taxonomy is a horrible sounding word, but it's a fantastic resource. It's all there in this free resource center. But it helps you think about what are the type of metrics, the type of things that you need to be thinking about to come up with a meaningful and credible measurement plan. So there's support at every level. It's all interactive. You fill that in, and you work your way across each step of these boxes. So you go from box 1, then you fill in the objectives, the inputs, the activities, the outputs, the outtakes, and the outcome. Remember, outputs is the content analysis. Outtakes is where we understand what our target audiences now think about stuff. Outcomes is what they've now done. And the final section is, how has this campaign helped us with our organizational impact? So we work our way across, and we end up with the ability to download a PDF. We can save and download a PDF. So here is an example. So my last job was as CEO of a company called Prime Research that you may have seen has just been acquired by Cision. And this is a case study that Prime used for its client Skoda for the launch of a new car, which was a 4x4 called a Kodiaq. And it was the first 4x4 car, SUV, that Skoda had made and built. And Prime used the framework to tell the measurement story. And here you can see how the framework, once we've completed it, presents that data. So it basically gives you a measurement plan on a page for you to work on. Again, my recommendation, use it as a planning tool, first of all, to set your targets, get alignment with your colleagues and your bosses, and then run it again at the end of the campaign and input the metrics to see how did we do. Now, what Prime did was it took that PDF and it made it look beautiful. So here is the same information, but put into a really smart case study, and was used to then enter into the Global Communication Effectiveness Awards. And this campaign won the Platinum Award for the best case study, the best example last year. And this case study is available for everybody to download, so you can see exactly what it is that Prime and Skoda did at this URL. So again, it's a shortened link, so it's a bit.ly/Almec Platinum. You'll be able to read about everything there, but some highlights were that the measurement company worked properly as consultants with Skoda. The measurement company wasn't thought of as an afterthought that just counts stuff at the end of the campaign, but was brought in advance. Prime has a huge amount of experience in the automotive sector and has years of data from the automotive sector. So one of the things that Prime did was, in advance of this campaign for Skoda, was able to look at historical data for historical launches of 4x4s, for launches of cars at different car shows, and show what worked, what didn't work, what type of topics did journalists engage with, what did they not engage with, where were the angles, where were the learnings from the past that Skoda could use to fine tune the campaign. The research wasn't only media; it was also market research. So asking that outtake. Remember, when we're trying to understand what the audiences think, it's typically market research. It's outtake analysis. So asking the target audience of people who are likely to buy SUVs, what type of things were they interested in? And then combined with these bits of information, Skoda was able to set a clear strategy on the campaign that it wanted to run. And what it did was it came up with a creative idea, which was about who has the most difficult journey to work, or the school run, who had the most extreme school run or commute by a vehicle. And that was a nice link through to mums, families with young kids, and people who might need an SUV. So there was the sort of catch, if you like. And then the measurement wasn't only the output stuff in terms of what then happened in the media, but it was linked through to the things that, if you're a car brand, really matter as well. So it included what did the target audience think of this car once it was launched, but more than that, it included pre-registrations of interest, car configurator creation. So for car brands, they really want you to go onto a website and pre-build a car. So these registrations, own channels, people coming to Skoda's channels about the car, and then through to sales. And then from the sales, and it's all in the case study, you'll be able to see that you could then show the value that the PR had generated for this brand. It's a very compelling case study, and it's totally available for you to read, but it's totally available for you to think about and do in each of your own organizations. You just have to put that thinking, that strategic thinking into the work that you're doing to measure it properly. So that's really where I wanted to leave it, but I just thought I'd just sort of revisit some of the key points that that we've talked about today. So first of all, AVEs, let's just quickly go back to them. This was a metric that was widely in use 10 years ago to 30 years ago, in that time period. Since the Barcelona Principles in 2010, they've been in rapid and significant decline, but still a reasonably high proportion of organizations use them, and particularly on a regional basis. And in this region, their use is higher than anywhere else in the world. And that needs to change, because as the world becomes more global and organizations are global, then providing a metric that is acknowledged as having no research behind it and as a flawed, inadmissible metric is undermining the value of your work. And I don't want you to do that. I want you to be able to prove your value in a meaningful and credible way, and AVEs do not prove value. Likewise, think about these software as a service tools. I think all of you probably receive a call or an email on a weekly basis from Salesforces trying to introduce you to some new tool that they've got, that they claim does everything, it counts everything, it measures your return on investment. But understand that measuring your return on investment isn't just counting outputs. It's really showing how you've helped your organization deliver against its objectives. It's critical to think about measurement, not just as an afterthought. Please don't think, I've done a campaign, now how am I going to measure it? What can we count? Please think about the measurement at the planning stage, and that will help you to think about setting targets. What is it that we're trying to achieve? And please, if we do that in conjunction with our boss, and we think about SMART objectives, and I think you've probably heard that term before, SMART objectives. So SMART is an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So we have to make sure that all our objectives are all of those things. Realistic being one of them. So if you're sitting down with your boss talking about targets, and your boss says something that's completely unrealistic, you can push back and you can have that conversation ahead and get alignment and agreement. And that will mean that you don't have to fear measurement anymore, because there's nothing to fear when you think of it more strategically like that. So we align our objectives with our organization, we move from outputs to outtakes to outcomes. The framework, the resource center, is available in 20 languages in wide use now around the world. It's a step-by-step process that will guide you through this best practice for any organization, for any budget. You don't have to have hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend. That will help you to measure your work. And I can promise you, when you think of it like that, you'll no longer fear it. And a final little story and bit of reminiscing from me, thinking back, to 1992, 93, when I was a young man at the PR agency, I was terrified of measurement. We had a measurement company that worked for us on some of our bigger campaigns back in those days. And one of our campaigns, which I did some work on, was the launch of the UK's national lottery. And I never really thought about the measurement. I used to get a monthly report. It would come at the end of the month, and normally the numbers were all massive in it, because obviously the national lottery launching in the UK was a big story. So we got loads of big numbers. And I remember going in to see the client one day and with this report and saying, look, isn't it great? Look at these massive numbers. And the client said, but hold on, there was a big issue last week where a lot of the coverage was negative, and it impacted significantly on issues that we're sensitive about, and yet your report just shows these big numbers. And he gave me all these questions that I hadn't thought about and was very uncomfortable answering. And it made me think, you know, I really need to engage with this a whole lot more. And then from that point, I then started to fear the measurement, because I hadn't set clear targets. We hadn't got realistic stuff. We didn't really think about what it was that we were actually trying to achieve, apart from just blanket coverage. And the mistake I was making then was not following the steps that I've got on this slide. If you do that, I can absolutely promise you there will no longer be a fear of measurement. You will actually look forward to it, because you know what, if something isn't working, that's great. It doesn't matter. We've learned it's not working. We adapt, we fine tune, we spend our resource in other places. If measurement is something that is of great interest to you, then I would ask that you consider joining Carly and Asim, myself, and 300 brands and measurement people from all over the world in Barcelona in June this year, between June 12th and the 14th. Almec will be hosting the Global Summit on Measurement and Evaluation. It really is the event that drives industry thinking. We've got fantastic speakers from global client brands coming to share their measurement challenges, their measurement successes, and their measurement stories. It really is a great place to network, to learn, and to share issues and problems, and be amongst a community that can help you. So please do take a look. You'll find more information on Almec's website, which of course is at almecorg.com. And please, the early bird tickets are still available at a discounted price, so do consider joining us for the conference. So on that note, I'm going to wrap up my talk and thank everybody for their time and their attention. And we'll go to questions, and Carly will join me in answering some questions. So I'll now have a look and see what we have. Okay, so we have a question here from Katie Natalya, who says, what's your advice on situations where communications is just one piece of the overall strategy and other activities aimed at behavior change are also occurring? Is it accurate to tie a business result back to a PR strategy in this context? So that's from Katie. Katie, thank you for your question. It's a common challenge that we get asked. There's many different things that can drive end user action. There's a whole marketing measurement technique called econometrics or market mix modeling, which aims to isolate the effect of different things for brands. Rather worryingly, many big brands do this at a level that PR often isn't involved in and perhaps doesn't even know it's going on within the organization. But a very basic version of what econometrics does is it takes every influence that could have created or could have helped shape an outcome, and it tries to, what it does is it tracks an outcome, first of all. So if we think about, let's imagine sales of cans of Pepsi. It tracks that top line sales number over time. And then it plots against it all of these different activities that have occurred and tries to attribute value. What it does at a basic level is it forces a match. So it will put into the model, the econometricians will put into the model the advertising spend, the direct sales, the sales promotion, the pricing. For someone like Pepsi, it will include things like the weather. Was it hot? Was it cold? Was it raining? It takes everything that it can think has an effect on that sales number, and it then forces it to fit and attributes value against each of those channels. The problem with the modeling is that if you don't put an input into it, it automatically attributes 0 against it. And many clients over the years that I've worked with have suddenly discovered that econometrics is going on in their organization, and that PR has been attributed with basically zero. A very big charity, one of the UK's largest charities, I remember about 5 years ago, called me up in a terrible state, their head of comms, because she had discovered that econometrics was happening at this charity. She had a PR team of about 80 people. You can imagine a significant budget. And one of the things they did was they have a big campaign in June each year. And she suddenly was presented with this econometric model that just showed a little bit of the peak in donations in June had been attributed not even to PR, but to what the econometricians have called PR stunts. And so the value that the boss of this charity was seeing from this econometric report was called a PR stunt and only showing in June, where of course that was just completely not right. And that's because data from the PR team was not being fed into this model. The problem also with econometric models is that humans at many levels are predictable, particularly British people. If you put a British person anywhere where there's a queue, we'll just join the back of it without thinking about, is it the right queue or why am I standing here? You know, in many ways, we humans act like sheep and follow each other, but in many other ways, we are very diverse and very different. And as the world around us has got more fractured and complicated, and we're exposed to literally hundreds of adverts each day, this econometric modeling is only getting more complicated. So what should we do? My advice to you would be, first of all, check within your client and within your organization, is econometric modeling happening already? If it is, make sure that you link your measurement team through to the econometrics so that they can start to provide a feed of data that means that PR gets its rightful share. If it isn't, then the cost-effective, sensible thing to do to look at outcomes is to take the outcome data for whatever it is you're trying to support, whatever the objective that you're trying to support is, take the output and the data as well, and then map them against each other and just do a simple correlation. The correlation doesn't always equal causation, but it is a pretty good indicator. And the beauty of correlation is that it's basically free. Is there anything, Carly, that you'd like to add to that?
That's exactly the approach that we've taken, that marketing mix is the gold standard when you're really trying to attribute the outcomes of PR activities amongst a mix of other things. And we've seen some AMEC members, such as the Cleveland Clinic, really provide powerful examples of the impact between advertising and public relations on hospital patient numbers. Cleveland Clinic are an AMEC member, and there's some case studies on the AMEC website that people can look into. But yes, Richard, it is important to actually go to that attribution modelling if you need to actually look at the impact of different types of activities.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're having to wrap up. Soma, are you there? Are we okay? We've got a few more minutes. Do you want to take this question? I think it's still
there. It's Lacy here. I'm not sure if Sam is still on mute, but we've certainly got another 5 minutes, so maybe one or two more questions.
Okay, so Carly's going to take the next question.
Hi everybody. I'm taking the question from Emma Rees, and I'm assuming, Emma, that you're working for the federal government in Australia. Hello. I agree with you. I think that
What's the question?
We're talking about the difference between measuring in government versus business. This comes up a lot. AMEC members do, measurement bodies do a lot of work with government. Looking at is the effectiveness of that communication, no matter what the objectives are. So it might be an objective of a government department might be that you want to shift perception about an aging population, or change the way that people view our Australian Paralympic team. There are all sorts of objectives that you might have as a communications objectives which can be measured. through quantitative and qualitative methodologies. So yes, it's very, very important to realise that it's not all about business outcomes, and sometimes there are policy outcomes and behavioural change that we need to track.
Okay, there's a question here as well from Carlos about, is there a framework or other tools we can use to measure internal comms? Carlos, I would say to you briefly that the process of this framework works for internal communications just as well as it does for external communications. If you think of the framework as a structured way of thinking about the right approach, then it's identical for for internal comms or for external comms. But obviously the metrics that you put into it will be different, but the process remains the same. And any more questions? Thank you so much.
I think Asim wanted to go through these slides, Richard.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Saima. Thank you, Richard, so much. Richard is going to go back to UK, and for all of us here in Asia Pacific, I wanted to share that Almec has an Asia Pacific chapter. Kali is the chair of the chapter, and I, Asim Sood, I'm the vice chair. So you can reach out to us if you have any questions around measurement. We'll be happy to answer those for you. Saima, if you could move to the next slide, please.
Yeah.
Richard already shared that we have the conference coming up in Barcelona. So on behalf of the Asia Pacific chapter, I would like to invite all of you. This is happening from 12th to 14th of June, and the focus is going to be on insights, innovation, and integration. A lot of speakers have already signed up. We have confirmed speakers from a large number of companies. We have some of these speakers coming in from Asia Pacific as well. And finally, other than the conference, Simon, if you could move to the next slide, please. We keep having webinars, for example, on how to write good award entries as a part of Almec Asia Pacific chapter. We'll make sure that we invite you for those as well. We also have a month every year wherein we celebrate measurement. And this year, in 2018, this month is going to be celebrated in November. We will have several activities happening all over the world, every day of the month, throughout the month. And we welcome you to join us for that as well. And lastly, our website, almecorg.com, you will get a lot of articles and how-to guides and resources on case studies. We welcome you to visit that as well. That's all from me from here. Thank you so much for joining the webinar. Saima, back to you.
Thank you, Richard, and the entire Almec team for giving us this insightful presentation. I have personally learned so much today. I'm sure all of us have some useful takeaways from this. And I think that's it. We'll be mailing you a recording, and we'll also be sending you a link for a survey on how we have done. That is our measurement. And please go through the link and the survey so that we can keep providing you these knowledge series webinars. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Richard.